The disparity in ratio between the smooth-backed specimens and the single carcass with dorsal spines notwithstanding, I believe the differences between the two types represent sexual indicators, not of the specimens themselves, but of the zygote or egg that each carries. As stated above, none of the specimens is equipped for independent life. Their sole purpose seems to be nothing more than that of living as a delivery vehicle, an ambulatory penis, if you will. Noguchi tapped her cigarette without looking at the tray and skinned back to the top of the page, totally absorbed. This is what Revner had gone after? Why hadn't he told anyone? Why hadn't he told her? While it is risky to postulate so much from such a tiny sample, we need to know as much as possible about these specimens as quickly as possible. If my assumptions are correct, or even near the mark, we're dealing with only one stage of this organism. The hybrid silicon-carbon cell construction would lead... Ambulatory penis, huh? Conjures quite an image, don't it? Noguchi jumped in her chair and turned quickly, heart pounding. A tall man with blonde hair and beard stood there, grinning. He swayed slightly on his feet. From the smell of him, he'd been drinking. A lot. She stood and backed away a step. You're from the Lector, right? The stranger took a step closer. Hell, I fly that bucket, he belched softly. Excuse me. Scott Conover, at your service. Noguchi smiled, but inched back a little more. His intentions weren't exactly clear, but one thing was. You're drunk, Mr. Conover. Yeah, but not too drunk, if you know what I mean. You're Miss Noguchi. I've been watching you. It's Noguchi, she said coolly, and you can call me Mom. Conover laughed and reached out to take her hand. Noguchi tried to pull away, but the pilot gripped her wrist tightly. He leaned close, his alcohol breath moist and pungent. I heard about what a tough lady you were, the company ramrod, right? His words slurred together slightly. The drunken pilot tried to pull her down to his crotch. I got your ramrod right here, ma'am, he stage whispered. Noguchi narrowed her eyes and took a deep breath. Scott couldn't find the Jap girl anywhere. He wandered around for a while, and eventually he heard some guy say she was watching the screens. Operations, he said to no one in particular, and stumbled in that direction. The door was open. He was torn between desire to march right in and woo the woman and desire to piss, which had gotten pretty overwhelming. He compromised and peed on the entry frame before his imminent conquest. She was reading some kind of porn hard copy. He could see that much. Damn, but she was fine. He imagined that small mouth all over him, on his dick, and she wanted it too, he could tell. They did the small talk thing for a minute or two, and she told him she was into being dominant, call me Mom, and the little vixen played chase, backing up, her cheeks flushed with the desire. And he reached out to touch her, to put her hand on his ready and willing equipment, and then he wasn't sure what happened. He must have tripped. Noguchi grabbed his arm above the elbow with her free hand and hooked one foot behind his. She twisted, pushing up and over at the same time, and the pilot went down. She jumped back and struck a ready pose, left foot forward, fists made. It had happened so fast she was barely aware of what she had done. The drunk groaned loudly. He didn't get up. Noguchi relaxed slightly, but kept her distance. Another man stepped into the room, dark-haired, wearing glasses. Scott? He looked down and moved immediately to the fallen man. Jesus, what happened? He stared up at Noguchi, at her fighting stance. Realization dawned on his face. You next? Adrenaline still pumped through her system. The drunk's friend stood, hands in the air. No, I was just coming to tell you that the ship is loaded and we'll be making our first shuttle run as soon as the inspectors give the Rinth a clean bill of health. He spoke all at once, in a rush, but seemed to catch himself. Noguchi nodded. You better have them check out this pilot too. She looked down at Conover and frowned, especially his judgment. I'm Tom Strandberg, Mum. Sorry about this. He's the designated drinker on this run. As the man spoke, he bent down and tried to help Conover to his feet. He grinned sheepishly. Tomorrow it'll be my turn. With a grunt of effort, Strandberg stood up, Conover half over one shoulder. Your turn to drink, or your turn to get some of what I gave him? Noguchi spoke sharply. She knew that none of this was Strandberg's fault, but damn him for excusing his friend so lightly. Attempted rape wasn't particularly funny. Strandberg edged towards the door with his heavy load. Look, I'll make sure he doesn't bother you again, okay? It seemed to be the perfect cue. Conover raised his head slightly. Damn bitch, he mumbled, and nodded back out. Strandberg carried the other pilot without another word. Noguchi sat back in her chair and felt her heart slow down little by little. If she didn't receive a formal apology the next morning, she would file a complaint with the company. Maybe I'll do that anyway. Conover certainly didn't deserve anything less. Oh, I got your ramrod right here. She surprised herself by laughing out loud. How classically dumb male. Did they teach lines like that in Neanderthal 101? Noguchi picked up the papers she'd been reading, a smile still on her face. Well, it had broken the tension she'd been feeling. After she'd read the same paragraph 3 times, she sighed and put the report down. This was important stuff, but she couldn't seem to regain her concentration after the rush of adrenaline that idiot's advances had created. Besides, it was late. Revna must have gone to the party or just gone home. She stood, stretched, yawned. Maybe she wasn't so very out of martial arts practice after all. She had tossed him without thinking about it. It came back quick enough when she needed it. She made sure that the recorders were all on and pulled her jacket off the back of the chair. She would talk to Revna tomorrow about these specimens. From the sound of it, there might be some crucial things going on out at Iowa Gorge, and it was her job to know about it. It was dark and hot. The smell of burned materials worked its way into that darkness, and with the scent came pain. The Chunde opened his mouth to scream at the young males to fall in line, but nothing happened. He sensed no movement. No sound of the students came to him. He tried to lift one arm to clear his vision, but nothing happened. Only heat and blackness and faraway pain. And then only dark. Scott hurt. He rolled his head and opened his eyes, but closed them again immediately. The whole fucking planet was spinning. And there was an earthquake or something. What planet? What the fuck? He mumbled. He opened his eyes again. Back to the land of the living. Tom's face swam into view next to him. They were riding a small cart outside, back to the ship. The earthquake was the rumbling motor. On Ryushi, the Lecter cowboys. Japanese, babe. Scott focused on Tom's face. Noguchi, he said. It was coming back. Tom grinned. Scott, you're ploughed. Apparently you tried to have sex with the head of the company here, a very capable woman who knocked the shit out of you, before you got round to figuring out that she wasn't interested. He paused for a second and then added, and if you ask me, you're lucky she didn't rip your dick off and feed it to you. Great, said Scott. He closed his eyes, exhausted. Nice to have you on my side, old buddy, old pal. Scott was almost asleep when the cart stopped. He growled and pulled himself upright. They were back at the Lecter. Need help? No, fucking Judas. He got out of the cart okay, but discovered that his legs weren't particularly interested in staying straight. Tom grabbed one of his arms and pulled it over his own shoulder. Scott leaned on him heavily. Yeah, okay. He shuffled along next to Tom as they walked out onto the second loading ramp. She can't treat me like that, you know. Maybe you want to go back and tell her that, Tom said. What's with the lights? Prindle's team is getting sloppy. Maintenance is going to hell. Scott sighed. Fuck the lights. But you know what I mean, right? I mean, I'm a goddamn star pilot, you know? On top of all the humiliation of it all, he was getting a huge headache. Tom leaned him up against a wall. Hang on a sec, let me get a light. Scott went on. And who the fuck does she think she is, you know? He stared at the floor. Goddamn rinth all over the place. Looked like one of them had thrown up on the floor. He towed the puddle of wet, mucousy goo with one foot and then looked away quickly. That was enough to make his stomach pretty damn unhappy. She's corporate, said Tom. She pulled rank on you. He reappeared holding a flashlight and reached out to steady Scott with his free arm. That's not all she pulled, said Scott glumly. I think my back is broken or something. Who in the hell left this hatch open? Tom stepped forward and shined the light into the dark rinth pen. You're not listening to me. Scott leaned back on the wall. Fuck the hatch. Hey, Ackland warned you, right? Tom's voice had taken on an echo-like quality. He had walked into the pen. With the last of his coordination, Scott followed him, narrowly missing a renegade doorway. Rinth puke everywhere. Tom continued. But you wouldn't listen, no. You just had to go and mess with the Queen. Tom stopped short. The flashlight hit the floor, and a low hiss filled the room, coming from all around. Scott shook his head and followed Tom's gaze. There were 4 or 7 or 20, a flurry of horrible images, long dark skulls and dripping razor teeth, gigantic, black, all arms and legs and spiny tails, hissing, moving forward, reaching for them.